My name is Maor Zagori, and I've spent my life telling stories. During that time, I've crossed paths with those who truly make a difference in this world. Some call them donors, others angels. I simply call them guests. This series delves into the lives of those who choose to give. This is the Philanthropists. Today, in the Philanthropists, I'm meeting Danielle Pollack. Danny, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Can you tell me what made you so passionate about CFHU?
Oh my goodness. Well, I will tell you, when I grew up in England, but my father came from a very large family from Czechoslovakia. And he was one of 11 children, and part of his family got to Palestine either in 1938 or many of them after the war. So when I was 15, I was a member of Habonim, which is a youth movement in London, as you know, and talking about going on Hachshara, which I never did. But so my parents allowed me to travel to Israel to meet family and see Israel. And I had an uncle there who was a professor at the Weizmann in polymers. And he said that he wanted me to see how modern Israel was. Because, you know, we only thought of it as, I mean, this was before 1967, of course, a long time. And I have to say, to see the Hebrew University with the buildings and the dormitories and the setting was just, at that time, magical.
Can you tell me a little bit about your support for Ethiopian students at the university? You know, it's quite made quite an impact. So I want maybe for you to tell me just how it got to you and how you got interested in this.
It was actually interesting. I was on a CFHU mission. It was for medical cannabis, actually. We were a small group of people.
What years?
Oh my God. It was around, I guess it was about 2015, I guess.
Wow, okay.
Because CFHU is at the forefront of research into medical cannabis.
Okay.
And as part of my business, I wanted to see if we could, it was being legalized in Quebec. And I wanted to see if we could somehow, my interest has always been to work with Israeli companies, obviously in the healthcare field, because that's the one I know most. So we were a small group, some people who were already in the cannabis business and other people who were just interested. And at that time, I met Mona, who was at the time the Dean of Social Work at the CFHU. And we were talking about, because I'm a social worker by training, we were just talking about the need to help students who wouldn't otherwise be able to go to school. Oh, and by the way, before I'd been on a committee for federation, and we were supporting Beersheba and Bnei Shimon. So we used to go there every year. We went for a week to see, you know, what's happening. And the saddest part was seeing older women from Ethiopia who had come, didn't know the language, were illiterate, and they were part of a community center in Beersheba. Women were showing the Israelis their cooking because it was a way of helping them gain some confidence.
Wow.
And they did some artwork that was clay. Beautiful little, very primitive animals. So I was introduced to, you know, what was happening in the Ethiopian community, good and not so good.
Wow.
So when we went to Jerusalem and I met Mona and we were talking about Ethiopian students who were the children of this generation of women who really came under very difficult circumstances. And so then I was able to help a little bit, not too much, but you do what you can when you can.
That's actually very moving to me because my grandparents, they came from Morocco and they came back in the 60s.
Right.
And that sense that, they're very focused about, my grandma used to be very focused about the cooking.
Yeah, of
because
course.
that was her strength.
Yes.
That's how she could show off her abilities. And this was something that gave her actually the approval of being part of the Israeli society.
Cooking is very important.
Yes, I know.
And they could be proud of what they were doing. So the students that we've been supporting, the Ethiopian students, grew up not in very privileged circumstances. Most of them married young, had children, and then went back to school.
Wow.
So there are social workers who have 4 or 5 children, very educated women, speak English, Hebrew, of course, and it's just very impressive. So, it's so important when you're making a donation or sponsoring to really feel that there's a purpose. Just to give money for no reason or just because you want your name on a building doesn't satisfy the soul.
Yeah.
But when you see how these people fight to become something and raise their families and maintain their traditions, that's also something.
Amazing. How did your experience in Ethiopia accompanying families to Israel influence your perspective on the importance of integration and higher education for Ethiopians?
Very good question. First of all, it was a difficult time. We were supposed to travel with a whole group of Ethiopians from Ethiopia to Tel Aviv. There was supposed to be a chartered plane, and we were supposed to be about 120 people plus Canadians. The Ethiopian government refused to give visas to most of them. So in the end, we went on a regular commercial flight with just 24 Ethiopians. It's a very disturbing situation because the community waits to go to Israel. And essentially, it's a two-edged sword because on the one hand, they're trying to save Ethiopian Jews and they're bringing them to a central point and then telling them that they're going to be going to Israel. And it's just not possible to, I don't know if I'm explaining it properly, but a lot of the Ethiopians now cannot really prove that they're fully Jewish, and that has become sort of like an obstacle.
Yes.
So many of them are still in these...
Even these days?
Yes.
Wow.
And many of them will never go to Israel. And that's something that is very, very disturbing.
How do you prove you're Jewish?
I don't know, because it's an oral tradition. I don't know. So I think the Jewish Agency is doing what they can, and they certainly, the improvement has been amazing. First of all, in order to send shlichim to Ethiopia, they're usually people who were Ethiopian themselves, speak the language, understand the difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing a wonderful job in terms of supporting. It's just that not everybody will be able to go to Israel. And they've been removed from their communities, their rural communities where, they lived with their people and with their jobs. And they are sort of in this limbo in Gondar where they live in small houses with no proper activities. The children have school, but it's very, very basic. And for families to live in those close quarters, waiting sometimes for years to go to Israel.
One final question I have for you is what advice would you give to those looking to make meaningful impact? And from my perspective, from what I've seen until today, from people I was working with and from people like you who are deep into this involvement, it became addicted because there's something about that circle of giving and receiving from that giving and actually changing the world.
First of all, you know what? Philanthropy can be anything. It can be giving your time, very important, having a personal involvement. And I think that's essential. I mean, there are people who are very philanthropic and they give money, and that's one activity. But for a lot of people, I think just having a background of philanthropy, I think it comes from family. You can give $1, you can give $10, you can have a lemonade stand when you're 6 years old. You know what I mean? That's all part of the education. And not worrying if you can't give a lot of money. Really, I think that's a very important thing. People say, well, I'm not rich, I can't give. There are many ways to give and many ways to get involved. And I think especially now, given what the world is going through and what Israel has gone through, we all have to give back on every level. And if it's not money, it's time, if it's volunteering, whatever, that's philanthropy as well.
Thank you. That was really an inspiring conversation.
Thank you.
If you want to watch more episodes of The Philanthropists, head over to Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University on YouTube.